My grandmother grew up in the slums of Prohibition-era Chicago. Her family lived in a small house near the harbor, and one of her earliest memories was of a particular hot summer when, seeking respite from the heat, she and her sister discovered a seldom used section of the boardwalk near an abandoned warehouse. Every night for several weeks, the two girls would make their way down to the docks and sit on the edge of the pier as the sun went down. My grandmother vividly and for a time fondly recalled the feeling of the seaweed between her toes as she and her sister dangled her feet into the murky water. It wasn't until years later that she returned to the pier and found the warehouse had been demolished. Curious, she made an inquiry with the Department of Planning and Development. Apparently, the warehouse had been owned for the time by the mob, who had been using it for a base of operations for a local prostitution racket. It had only been uncovered when an associate began disposing of rivals by fitting them with concrete shoes and dumping them into the harbor. Investigating officers had recovered nearly 24 bodies from the water of a secluded pier nearby. How had the bodies been discovered? A passing fisherman spotted some of the victims' hair floating near the surface. It looked a lot like seaweed. Anna Hamilton didn't see herself as a suspicious person, but when someone's been following her for quite a while, she gets a queasy feeling in her stomach. Guaranteed she was out late, but she was strong from taking the new karate classes. She knew she couldn't and wouldn't be defeated. Anna picked up the pace, her legs and arms pumping as she turned her walk into a brisk one, looking back to see the dark silhouette was still following her. Anna was the strongest urge to spin around and smack the stranger's face and demand them to answer why they were following her at this time of night. But her mind argued with her, saying how it may just be a coincidence. Maybe the stranger was going the same way as her. A few more minutes, and she came to an entrance of her cookie-cutter home. She hated it, but she wanted to humor her mother to make it seem as if she actually cared about the presence of the house. So she put flower pots up everywhere randomly. This neighborhood had no history of crimes, but Anna had seen the news, and people get crazier by the second. She turned at a 90-degree angle up her driveway, and what now seemed to look like a man slowed his step, making Anna grow even more concerned. "Look, can I help you with something? Are you lost, or did you just want to follow me to creep me out?" Anna finally confronted the man. But all the man did was look up at her with haunted eyes and move his head forward once again. It was almost robotic. "Well, I'm going inside now." Anna unlocked the door, and with suspicions, she locked it up quickly behind her, watching as the man walked into the foggy night. The next day, Anna had almost forgotten about the whole ordeal. But looking out her bedroom window, she could see the shape of a man standing outside her property, toes barely touching the curb of her yard. Turning around, she turned on the light to make sure she hadn't gone crazy. She turned back to her window, only to see the mysterious man was gone. Walking with her purse across one of her shoulders, she headed to her place of work, which so happened to be a library. If someone would ask, she would say she loved her job. The smell of books, the hushed laughter of school kids. Everyone loved Anna too. She was known to be the cool librarian, as she let the kids sneak in food and drinks, or let them be a little too rambunctious. As always, her fellow librarian friend, Katie, sat on one of the desks behind the tall counter, but instead of the latest Cosmo issue, she had a newspaper in her hand. "My dear Katie, is that an actual newspaper in your hands? I never knew I'd be alive the day that Katie Price would read it," Anna joked, and Katie stuck her tongue out in response. Anna put her bag in the crew room and went to sit next to her friend. Peeking over her shoulder, Anna's eyes furrowed, and she pointed to the picture of a man that looked very similar. "Hey, I know him." Katie looked interested and set the newspaper down an inch. "You do? How?" Anna shrugged. "He's weird. He followed me home yesterday, and I think I saw him outside my lawn this morning." "Are you sure, Anna?" Anna looked at her friend in confusion. "Yes, of course. Why?" "Because he was murdered 2 weeks ago." sat on my bus on the way to school, listening to music and paying little to no attention to other students. At one of the stops, my mind snapped back to reality. I looked towards the house, the small house. Tommy's house, I thought. A hand slipped through the drapes of the window and waved the bus driver to move on. He's sick, I thought, paying no large amount of attention to the situation. The day flew by. I watched the local news channel after school, and what I heard paralyzed me. Tommy's entire family was killed that day by an unknown suspect. After hearing this news, I moved back up to my room and quietly fell asleep. The next day I sat on the bus. We drove past Tommy's house, and the bus driver, unaware of Tommy's family's fate, stopped at his home. As I was about to get up and explain to her what happened, something caught my eye. A pale hand slipped through the drapes of the window and waved the bus driver to move on. After a night of carousing with his buddies, Billy was ready to head home. "Are you sure you want to walk home by yourself?" asked Todd. "You've heard the rumors, right?" "What rumors?" asked Billy. "You know, the problem with vampires," he said. That last word was almost a whisper. "Really? I can't believe you're taking that seriously." "Why shouldn't I?" "'Cause it's ridiculous, that's why. I need the scoot." "It's so late, the sun's almost up." Todd shrugged. "Suit yourself, but if you get killed tonight, don't say I didn't warn you." "I won't say anything. I'll be dead," Billy called back as he started walking. The echoing laughter from the guys made him smile. He hadn't been walking long when he heard something rustling in the dark. He stopped and looked around, but the noise stopped. He cursed his own paranoia and continued, but he couldn't shake that feeling. A moment later he heard it again, louder. His fear turned to anger. "Who's out there?" he roared. Nobody answered. He told himself he was just being stupid, and the best thing to do either way was to get home as quickly as possible. He was just about to turn when something charged him from the shadows. It happened so fast he had no time to brace himself as the hulking figure hit him like a freight train. The next thing he knew, he was pinned to the ground by a burly man with a crazed hatred on his face. His eyes burned with a mixture of fury and disgust. "Who are you?" Billy demanded. "Who do you think?" he said in a low, hoarse voice. Then Billy knew. This was the killer everyone had been whispering about. The vampire problem wasn't just a rumor. The man reached his tool belt and took out items that sent a wave of panic through Billy. He squirmed violently, but it was no use. His attacker was way too strong. He shoved the wooden stake against Billy's chest and raised the hammer high. Billy screamed in terror, his fangs glistening in the moonlight. Number 5. I was in my bedroom doing the typical at-home teenager thing, staying up late, digging around the depths of the internet, and generally not paying attention to anything other than what was on my monitor. It was the early morning, around 2 o'clock, and everything in my house was asleep but me. The room was nice and warm, but despite it being the dead of winter. Since we had the windows replaced last week, we had been losing heat, especially in my bedroom, through some old storm windows. But the bitter cold was now kept outside. I don't remember what I was doing. I think in the terror that consumed me, I must have forgotten. I heard the noise at my window, not the sound of a bug flying into it or the shrubs brushing against it. No, it was an odd noise, a thumping noise, something I had never heard before. I didn't think of it initially, whether it was because I genuinely believed it was nothing or because I didn't want to find out what it was. I can't say, but I sat there for a moment and just listened to it. It was distinctly rhythmic. Thump, thump, thump. It lasted only 15 seconds or so, then stopped. I shuddered, but shrugged it off, and after spending another hour or two browsing and consciously not looking toward the window, I turned my computer off and fell into an uneasy but eventful sleep. This morning, after the sun had been up for a few hours, and the things that go bump in the night were doing whatever they do during daylight hours, I walked to my window and spent a few minutes trying to replicate the sound I'd heard. I tapped the window, bumped it with some soft objects, even locked and unlocked it, but I couldn't figure out for the life of me what had made that sound. Nothing I did was even close. I figured that the event had been a fluke, and the day was normal until this evening. My dad arrived home from work at the usual time and decided that the house was too stuffy, so he came into my room and went to open the window. Never in my life have I been so genuinely wishing I was deaf. My dad had forgot to unlock the window before trying to open it, and when he pulled up, it produced the same noise I heard last night. My window only has handles on the inside.